The start of the new year has brought about some changes within the labour market to ensure some stability amid our third year of the pandemic. For more on the status quo, I have Professor Yang Hee-dong from Ewha Women's University. Welcome back, Professor Yang.
Thank you for inviting me.
I also have Professor Cho Hee-kyung from Hongik University. It's a pleasure to see you again, Professor Cho.
It's a pleasure to see you. Happy New Year.
Right, Happy New Year. Professor Yang, my first two questions will be to you. I'm going to start off with Economy and Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi claimed the labour market here in the country has returned more or less to its pre-pandemic levels. Do you share this view?
Well, in terms of numbers, I mean, his comment and his argument makes sense. Because in terms of employment rate, we have about 61 point some ratio, which is very far above than the numbers 1 year ago. And our unemployment rate is stays at about the 2.6, 2.8, which is also almost 1 point lower, 1 percentage point lower than 1 year ago. But if you take a look at the figures and the phenomena behind those numbers, and we have to consider both the losers and winners behind these numbers. Well, the major winners behind this growth include like healthcare, social welfare, are very closely related to the pandemic, and also transportation and the warehouses, which is also very related to the delivery of your the house items back to the individual houses, and also IT sectors that they need to recruit a lot of professionals for the online the activities. But the losers cause a lot of concerns for us, actually, including myself, because the losers include lots of young and the 20s or older people have moved the job from their current repetitive afterworks down to those physical labors. And these sectors include like transportation, lodging, and wholesalers, retailers, and these industries are major losers, right, from this pandemic phenomena. Well, I note that the Korean government has pushed a lot for the sake of income-led the growth, income-led economy. But you should be aware that the major victims of this principle and the philosophy are self-employers, right? Because we will get back to this issue of job polarization. But there are many different types of self-employers, and the major victims of this economic activity is self-employed, particularly with employees. And we will get to this issue later on.
Right. Actually, let's get to it right now. Job polarization, it's an unfortunate reality here in the country. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we can think about the three mid tiers in the job market. The top tier is professionals with the degrees and better professional skills. And middle tier may be repetitive office workers or the service workers. But the problem is far downstairs. There are very hard physical laborers. The major problem of job polarization is lots of middle tiers are being pushed down towards bottom tiers. Well, the major victims are again very young, 20s, the students who have lost their job from the service sectors, particularly in the restaurants and the retailers and wholesalers. So they're now working as the delivery workers, all right, and whose contract used to be made on daily basis or very temporary basis, like less than 1 year. And besides, this new job is very dangerous for their job security and safety. So I have great concerns about this brand new trend in the job market caused by pandemic. So the Korean government should pay more attention to this very, the qualitative changes, right, and transformation in the job market. Not just about the numbers, but we have to take a look at what is actually going on in the structure of the job markets.
Right. And keeping in mind the thoughts of Professor Yang, Professor Cho, staying with polarization within the labour market, what can you tell us about the potential broader implications of this reality on society, perhaps as a whole?
So, as Professor Yang mentioned, quantitatively, it may appear as if the economy is on the whole, not doing too badly. The unemployment rate is not that high. We have actually recorded the largest export, revenue in history of record keeping. All of that sounds really great, particularly in the midst of this corona pandemic. But again, coming back to the qualitative, nature of the new jobs that people are doing, it's they are really on a slippery slope. They no longer enjoy the security of the kind of jobs that our parents' generations had. And obviously, we no longer believe in a job for life. That's simply not going to happen anymore. But this kind of polarization in the job market is, of course, going to lead to greater inequality, greater income level gap. And the problem with that is that it's going to end in breakdown of social cohesion and dissolution of social solidarity. And when it becomes even more extreme, you could actually see, so much unhappiness among the populace that you could have popular uprising. If we look at historical data, for example, just before the French Revolution, the income disparity in the nation was such that top 10% of the population controlled 90% of the national wealth. And within the top 10%, the top 1% actually controlled 60% of national wealth. And so if you want a country that is socially cohesive and not just economically growing, then the government really needs to look at how we can change the existing systems and structures to better prepare ourselves for this, what is a seismic shift in the job market.
Right, and perhaps as part of such efforts, Professor Cho, the new year has ushered in some new policies within the labour market. What, first of all, is your general assessment of the changes in place?
I think it's just too little and not enough substantive changes. So we have changes like slight increase in the minimum wage, I think around 5% year on year from 2021. But it's still, the actual figure is still less than 10,000 won, which was the campaign promise by the Moon administration. So some economists had calculated that the annual increase under the Moon administration in the minimum wage is actually less than what it was under Park Geun-hye administration. And so it's really disappointing because the Moon administration came in promising that they are going to improve conditions for the workers. They are going to, support this model of economy where it's income growth led rather than, sort of this trickle down kind of, rising tide type of, model. And so they've really not met the expectations of the people. There are other things like, applying mandatory public holidays to smaller businesses. Until recently, I think businesses that employed fewer than 50 people were not required, mandatorily to give particularly ersatz or substitute public holidays. So if you had a public holiday that fell on a Saturday and you had a Monday off as a result, these small businesses didn't have to implement that. And other things like employment insurance being provided for platform workers, for example. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But again, is that enough? Is it really going to help those people in reality? You have to look at the details. There are some other augmented programs for young people and people with disabilities, where government is providing subsidy for businesses to hire those people. But those are not really new schemes, but essentially an addition or substitution of existing programs. So on the whole, I would say, maybe a C.
Right. Or this reminds me of something you said during our prior session about the devil being in the details.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Right. And before we touch upon platform workers then, Professor Yang, Professor Jo mentioned the minimum wage increase. It has been raised to above 9,000 won. What are your thoughts on the implications of this raise on perhaps earnings and employment?
Well, in terms of the numbers, the increase rate is about 5.1% to 9,100 something. But if you consider like any other welfare, the fees such as for the insurances, and also the health, the industrial, the accident, the insurance fees, then actually the growth rate amount to 7.5 or so. And this rate could be very, very threatening, particularly to small and micro business, the employers, such as for the sample employers. So if you take a look at the breakdown of the operating incomes of self-employers, I mean, these numbers are too ridiculous, because if you add up the annual income for those, based upon the minimum wages, the annual income will amount to 21.8 million won. But the average, the operating income of sample employers is less than 20 million won. Particularly if you take a look at the art sectors, their annual operating income is less than 3 million won. And the distribution and lodging and all those, the micro sectors used to be run by the self-employers have lower than the 15 million won in the operating income. And simply, those micro businesses used to be run by self-employers. They cannot afford to employ more employees. So that's why we could see the increase in the numbers for the self-employers without employees. In other words, their busy environment for sample employment is getting worse, because lots of employers are used to and come to prefer to work alone without any employees. So that's a big problem for the increase of the minimum wages.
Professor Cho, going back to the platform workers that you mentioned, also starting this year is the reality that these workers can sign up for employment insurance. Now, surely this is a move in the right direction, though.
Certainly, I strongly support coverage or extension of coverage of employment insurance to these platform workers. That's definitely a plus. It's an extension that is continuing the movement that's happened since December 2020, where the insurance coverage was extended to artists and other special employment type of workers, including long-haul truck drivers and after-school tutors, etc., etc. So those people who were in the past categorized simply as freelancers and therefore not entitled to employment insurance because they were not employees but freelancers as such. But I think we really have to make a proper recognition of the fact that the so-called freelancers are not really freelancers in the traditional sense of the word freelancer. A freelancer in the past were typically somebody with a very specialist set of skills who were able to charge a premium for their services. Their work would be usually project-bound and time-bound, and they would be doing this for a short period of time, and they would be able to charge more because of their specialist skills and also the fact that they were much more flexible. The employers didn't need to hire them for an extended period of time. They didn't really need to provide all the attendant, insurances, nor give them, annual holidays, all of that stuff. So because it cost them less to employ them, they were able to command a premium. And in fact, I have many consultant friends who prefer to work on a freelance basis rather than be actually tied to a single company, because they could pick and choose what project they worked on, the hours that they worked on, where they worked, etc., etc. But the freelancer, as we use the term now, doesn't really apply anymore. They are essentially people who the companies don't want to employ because it costs more to employ them on a regular employee basis. And so they're essentially using this cover of a freelancer provided, as a technicality under the law to escape the kind of liabilities and the duties that they should properly carry as an employer. And so platform workers are a typical example of that. They don't have a control over what they actually do. They essentially they are under the direction of the platform operators. What they carry, whom they provide the service to, where they have to be, etc., etc. And so to categorize them as freelancers and then deny them the benefit of those protections that are created for employees, people who are essentially earning a keep through their labor, is just a travesty. And so I am glad that we are extending the employment insurance to cover these people. But again, the devil is in the detail, because the employment insurance, for example, provides benefits such as unemployment payment if you lose your job, if you happen to get pregnant, or if you want paternity leave, I think it does cover paternity leave now, you can get maternity or paternity leave. The durations differ, obviously. But the unemployment benefit only kicks in if you are terminated involuntarily, i.e. if you're fired. It doesn't work if you resign yourself because the hours are too long or the conditions are too difficult, etc. And also other benefits under the insurance only applies if your income drops by 30%. Again, if you sort of decide to cut some of your work because you are too exhausted, it's not going to apply. And so those kind of gaps mean that they're not really properly protected.
Right, so there are blind spots there. And staying with that, Professor Yang, there are concerns, however, that mandating employment insurance may result in higher financial burden for small businesses and for customers as well. What are your thoughts?
Well, I do agree. Well, the minimum wage increase and the sharing the burdens of the labor insurance fees between the employers and employees, well, that is pretty burdensome for the employers, absolutely. The major problem with this number is particularly the managers have great concerns about the effectiveness of labor insurance. And we talked about the major reasons for the labor insurance, but there are a couple of major objectives of labor insurance. The first one is protecting the laborers. And the congratulatory or the condolence fees may be paid to laborers, but the volume of those fees are very minimal. So I'm not sure whether any recipient will be happy with that, the minimum amount of those fees. And also the supporting the employment by retraining. But these days, retraining is now outsourced to private sectors. And these private sector firms are very very poor in terms of the operations and qualities. So I'm not sure whether their education, the qualities are enough to help actually those, the people to get on the job. So first of all, we need to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of this, the qualities of labor insurance. And that is the major concern. And everybody will be really happy if they do believe that their payment and to share the burden of this labor insurance will lead to the effective improvement of labor insurance.
So there are still a lot of tasks ahead then. This can only be a start. I see. Hopefully we'll have a session where we can talk about the actual advances made on that front.
Right.
All right, Professor Yang, as always, thank you very much for your insights. Professor Cho, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.